Hi, I'm Susie Morgan. I'm the founder and director of training at Precision EMDR Academy. And what I want to talk about today, for some of you might feel controversial, it might feel uncomfortable, but for others, it'll feel like, just preaching to the choir. So it is this idea that I think we have been really missing it when our case conceptualization has been really based on diagnostic codes or these siloed diagnoses based on diagnostic criteria, versus really looking at symptoms and symptoms as strategies in specific. And really, I think that the key to understanding this is really found in this idea that trauma is really more and more understood by research to be the driver of the symptoms that we see in our clients across mental illnesses, across diagnostic codes and criteria. So what I want to do today is talk about basically the foundations for that thought process. So you can see that perhaps I'm not going as rogue as it might sound. And then really talk about how this develops. How does someone who has early trauma develop out these strategies that really are what we see as symptoms when they're walking into our offices today? And then really how can we see this showing up in really specific ways when someone presents with anxiety or depression or anger issues or things like that. If we have this sort of this curiosity to look underneath those symptoms and really understand how they're functioning. So let's go ahead and get started with this foundational piece. So first of all, I think there is a really important kind of thought process that's getting more attention. And I think it really started to get attention when the ACEs study became more part of our conversation as clinicians. And this is that research that's showing correlationally that early adverse life events really show up as contributing factors or underlying risk factors for the development of mental health issues later in life. And that has been even further supported by the APA's most recent sort of treatment guidelines that they've released for complex trauma. And that was released in 2004, so not too long ago. And what they line out is actually a really strong list of research articles that support this idea that early trauma especially, or just repeated traumas in general, really tend to be high risk factors for the development of the entire spectrum of mental health conditions. And I'll link that here in the notes just so you can reference it, because it's really actually phenomenal to see the depth of research that they list out there. So we have this idea that there is this correlational link between the development of mental health symptoms and exposure to trauma. And what has also really influenced my personal thought process has been kind of two people that I did quite a bit of training under. One who would probably be appalled that I'm mentioning him on an EMDR related talk, and that's David Burns, because he is very much a CBT guy and not a big fan of EMDR therapy, at least last time I asked him any questions about it in a training. And he presented this idea that part of the way that we could get underneath symptoms and we could start to really kind of loosen them up would be to ask about their functioning. We can ask in these paradoxical ways, what are the advantages of these symptoms? And what are the costs if you were to no longer have these particular symptoms? And really almost simultaneously, I learned about Jim Knight's approach in the EMDR field, where we are actually using specific protocols for targeting these sort of levels of urge to avoid certain things or the level of positive affect associated with certain things. But in doing that, we are asking similar paradoxical questions. And so we can really be targeting a client's resistance to letting go of a particular attachment to a strategy, attachment to a response pattern, things like that, by asking similar questions. This idea of asking, as you focus on that and you think about, no longer feeling X, where do you notice that resistance in your body? Usually you also focus on, what level of that resistance there is and where do you notice in your body. But then you also ask these probing questions to deepen that have to do with what's good about that symptom, what's good about not letting go of that, or things of that nature. So it's this idea that if I can ask paradoxically what's good about, or what would it cost me to lose this particular symptom, that means it has a function. It's functioning for the client in some sort of way, or at least it's perceived to function for the client in a way. And so kind of my gears started going in the direction of, well, if it functions in that way, or it's perceived to function in that way, but it's actually causing the client problems now, was there a time when the client first adopted that symptom, first adopted that strategy, when it actually was functional for them, when it was actually an adaptation to their environment? And the answer to that is yes, that there is trauma, and then there is a response to manage that trauma that we see very early on in our clients who have had early adverse life events, non-secure attachment relationships in their households. And so we can actually, just like we can map trauma memory networks, we can actually map how the client learned to respond to the trauma in a particular way. And then fast forward, we can actually see now how that client gets triggered to that trauma memory network, but then automatically has that symptomatic reaction now and manages it in a similar way. And so we have this possibility of being able to treat not just the trauma itself, but actually the response patterns as well. And so I think that all of this kind of connected the dots even further when I was sitting in a training with Dini Laliotis, who many of you also know in the EMDR world, and she was talking about attachment strategies. And immediately I started connecting dots to, oh, okay, we can do this with attachment strategies, but we also can do it with these sort of affect regulation strategies that we see develop because a client, when they were little, needed to sort of do something with the extreme levels of sadness or fear or anger that they were feeling in a situation where there was no one who would listen to them, or no one who was attuning to them or seeking to protect them. And so they had to learn how to do something with it. They needed to shut it down, or they needed to find a way to sort of manage the situation, or they needed to find a way to find some kind of relief in their nervous system in a situation where they could not escape. They could not go and just choose another family. Children very much are in captivity if they are in a family environment that is not safe or is not meeting their needs. They can't just go pick another family, and they don't have the empowerment or the many of choices that we do have as adults. So, and that's really the issue of it, is that what they learned in childhood to do in order to manage that unmanageable affect really becomes locked into their response pattern into adulthood, and then we see symptoms. So just to digress for a minute, one of the questions that comes up is, well, why does this client sort of manage things by becoming more anxious and engaging perhaps in a lot of worry or in OCD rituals? And why does this client instead get involved in addictions or various compulsive behaviors? Or, on the contrary, why does this client shut down more, become more depressed, become more withdrawn? And honestly, I don't know why, but my theory is that it's kind of a combination of things. So first we have, polyvagal theory, which would say, okay, the first thing we're going to do as little ones is we're going to reach. And in families like this, you reach, you get nothing, or you get something worse. And so what's left then are the other options inside the nervous system, which are to, on a basic level, to fight, to flee, to shut down. And so really the nervous system will opt for whichever is kind of the best, wisest choice in the situation. And perhaps what is the best, wisest choice for that little nervous system is determined by temperament, genetics, whatever they sort of are, predisposed to sort of, intrinsically have in their little bodies as their menu of options. Or maybe it's even modeling from their caregivers, their parental figures, that really kind of determines which direction the nervous system goes and which strategies are developed out. I don't know. But it's always curious to think about that. So let's take this then into kind of practicality. What are the ways that we might see this in our clients as they're walking in the door? What are the types of things that we need to start to think about, if instead of thinking of, trauma is PTSD and anxiety and depression and anger management, those are, totally separate siloed issues. What if we kind of think of all of these things in, one singular kind of formulaic way that says, okay, we have these early trauma experiences, or we have these early unmet attachment needs, and then these symptoms are actually showing up as strategies, affect management strategies, in order to manage a situation that the client couldn't when they were little tiny, but now are locked into. So these are not by any means the exhaustive list of choices. And I really encourage you to be curious coming out of this talk, rather than just, anxiety is always this and OCD is always this. So these are just suggestions. These are just ways to start to get you thinking about what could be going on here. So for instance, in that sort of category of anxiety, when we have worry, perhaps the strategy or the goal with worry is to have a semblance of control. Like, if I can worry enough about it and I can think of all the little details and take care of all the little details, or just worry enough that I've taken care of all the little details, maybe I can feel like I have some semblance of control in an entirely powerless situation. Maybe with OCD, it's something that's more about magical thinking. I actually heard this suggested first by Sandra Paulson in a talk, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So if you think about OCD, these rituals of like, if I touch this thing so many times, if I click the light so many times, or if I make sure I checked the things, or that sort of thing, there's a sense in which the nervous system calms. And oftentimes those patterns start when your clients are in those early years, where magical thinking is just how the brain thinks. So in your like preschool years and early childhood, where it's again an unmanageable, uncontrollable situation. But if I do this thing just right, then perhaps everyone will calm down. Perhaps everything will be okay. And it becomes this sort of magical way in which the child can actually have some empowerment in that situation. And then panic attacks are also an interesting thing. And this was something that, that I really came across with one of the formulations that David Burns talks about in his cognitive behavioral model. And it's this idea, he calls it the hidden emotion, but I really think about it as the client has learned that it's not okay to say a thing. It's not okay to do a thing. And they must not say or do or even think or acknowledge a certain thing. And yet the body is not okay with that. And so the body speaks for them. The body says no, and will really kind of shut down the process for them until they're in a place where they can really say or do or acknowledge what they need to say or do. So again, the symptom is functioning as a strategy, but in just a really creative way. So then we go over to things like depression. So, really on a simplistic level, oftentimes this idea of like, I won't hope, I won't, I'll shut down rather than move into my world. Well, then I don't risk disappointment. I don't risk failure. I protect against those things that have caused me damage in the past. And even so, it can even sort of get intertwined in these attachment strategies of basically, if I don't reach, if I don't engage, then I can avoid rejection. And that's the case with a lot of these, is that distinction between attachment strategies and affect management strategies, it can be a little bit arbitrary, but I think it's still really helpful to think of them in these ways that separate them out, even if it is arbitrary, in order to really kind of have more curiosity and eyes to see what might be going on underneath just the symptoms on the surface. And so then we get into things like anger management, let's say, or anger issues. So one of those things is, through modeling, what a child might have learned is that by really getting big and scary, I have the most power in the room, and perhaps then I can keep myself safe. And then also it can be just, if I tantrum, you pay attention to me. I get what I need, and maybe it's the only way I get what I need. So every single symptom out there, I think we can really start to conceptualize in this way, and really just start to be curious with our clients in the ways in which they specifically have developed out these affect management strategies in order to really cope with situations that they had no control over. And so their little child nervous systems came up with a genius way to deal with a situation when there was no other real solution. And I think that one of the things about this approach is that it really takes away a lot of the shame. And it also helps take away some of that resistance that we can feel like, where we're really not being able to make headway with certain things. But if we really understand the why, and the really important why that these strategies were there in the first place, then we can get more buy-in from the client to be able to start to treat them in a way that can help them let those strategies go. And also by treating the trauma that is driving those strategies, we're able to really also eliminate kind of that perceptual need for them to continue. So just to kind of recap where we've been, it's this idea that perhaps we can look more usefully at our clients' symptoms as strategies rather than conceptualizing cases according to diagnostic criteria or diagnostic codes or categories. And that we really can see how trauma drives the development of these strategies, which then becomes symptomatic for our clients as adults. And by having curious eyes to see how these symptoms might be functioning for our clients or being perceived by the nervous system to function for our clients, we have more of a way in, and we can really create radical kind of shifts for our clients in their adult functioning now that they are in a place where they have more choices and they have more empowerment than they ever did when they were little. So if you are curious about learning more about how to treat these things and how to really map these things out, definitely join us for EMDR basic training or our advanced courses at Precision EMDR. I would love for you to share your thoughts on this with this video. You can shoot me an email at susie@precisionemdr.com, or you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook and interact with me there at Precision EMDR, same as here. So anyways, I would love to hear more of your thoughts, and thank you so much for joining me.